City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the Theater. This seminar, The Drowsy Chaperone.
Hello, I'm Sondra Gilman, Chairman of the American Theater Wing, with our board president, Doug Leeds. Welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars.
We'll be back later in this program to tell you about the American Theater Wing. But right now, let's join our distinguished panel.
It is not often that a wedding present becomes a Broadway musical. It is also very rare that a completely Canadian musical reaches Broadway. But in the case of The Drowsy Chaperone, that is exactly what's happened. The new musical Drowsy Chaperone is both an homage and a parody to classic musicals from the 1920s, and today we're going to spend time finding out about how that show came to the stage. We have a tremendous panel of people who have been part of making this show happen. Let me introduce them all to you now. First, we begin with Roy Miller, one of the show's producers. Then we have Greg Morrison, music and lyrics. Lisa Lambert, music and lyrics. Bob Martin, book writer and also leading actor playing the man in the chair. Casey Nicholaw, who is both the director and the choreographer. Don McKellar, also writer of the book of the show. And finally, Kevin McCollum, another of the show's producers. We'll be joined later in the program by two members of the company of Drowsy Chaperone as well. I hope that my opening was sufficiently tantalizing to have people say, a wedding present? So I want to turn to the man whose wedding became the Drowsy Chaperone. And Bob, if you can just tell us the story of your friends ganging up to celebrate your wedding, you and Janet Van de Graaff.
Yes, well, I want to correct you, first of all. In Canada, it's quite common for wedding gifts to become Broadway. Get that out right away. No, it has been an extraordinary journey, and it started, I was getting married in 1998 to my wife, Janet Van de Graaff, who's an actress. And I asked Lisa Lambert, who was my best man, to...
Is that also common in Canada?
I think it was a unique thing. And I asked her to take care of the stag. It's one of her, or stag, or bachelor, bachelorette party, as you Americans call it. And I asked her to take care of the entertainment. And so she really told me nothing about what she was planning. And then Janet and I saw an ad in a local paper for a show at a club in downtown Toronto called the Rivoli, and the show was called Oh What a Pair, which was a kind of inside joke about a fake show title that we had suggested for an awkwardly titled show. Oh, it's a hilarious joke amongst my friends. But the evening was called Oh What a Pair, and it consisted of two acts, the first act being sort of stand-up routines and sort of little comic moments where friends from the theater community and comedy community sort of did a little tribute to myself and my wife. And then the second half was something called The Drowsy Chaperone, which was about 40 minutes long, and it was basically a 20s musical. Fully costumed.
And it was Greg and Lisa and Don who'd cooked this whole thing up?
Yeah, it was the three of us, plus there was a group of comedy people and theater people who are friends of ours in Toronto who were part of this whole thing too. We all kind of cooked it up together. And
originally thought of as being a one-night event.
Yeah.
Unless you were going to get remarried.
Right, yeah.
It was originally thought of as sort of a one-off thing. You know, our little community of people, we used to create sort of fake musicals.
That's just as a hobby?
Well, we were all performers, and we would perform them at places like the Rivoli and at the Fringe Festival. You have a New York Fringe, and our Toronto Fringe is very similar to that. So we would do little shows like that. Drowsy Chaperone, though, came out simply out of love from my friends, directed at us. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so good when we first saw it, because the humor was not directed at any particular market, but at our own circle of friends. And Janet and I saw it and said, well, we want to do something with this show. We want to share it. So we sort of expanded it for the Fringe of Toronto. Don and I wrote a book, which then included the character of Man in Chair, who narrates this show and provides a perspective on
I think we realized that when we saw it, that it was, like we said, it was for the community, and it was a weird little standalone musical, and we thought it was very funny, but we realized that we needed some perspective on it for other people to understand and to allow them to laugh at it. So I think Lisa and I came up with this idea of Bob actually being in it, because of course he wasn't in it initially.
Well, I was going to say, was it a case of, you did this wonderful thing for him and Janet, and then one day he turned to you and said, but I have some notes? Or...
Well, no, he was joking. Yeah, he came on stage at the Rivoli after the show and said, "What a wonderful show! I have some notes." And
that's just the kind of person.
That's just the kind of sarcastic person he is. No, actually, we had to sort of force him to play this part because when we expanded the show for the Fringe, we thought we would just write in some more quirky 1920s characters, and Bob would play a mentalist or something, And then it's like, no, somebody has to be funny.
The minister, the rector, I think, would have been the obvious choice.
Oh, that's true.
Let's take a moment and explain that the premise of the show is that we're watching a diehard fan of classic musicals alone in his apartment, the man in the chair, played by Bob, who begins to play for us, the audience, selections from this classic musical of the 20s, The Drowsy Chaperone. And to be clear, there's no such musical. No.
There is now.
Or is there?
Exactly.
Or is there?
Or is there?
Does PDQ Bach exist?
So what was the process? Because if it was just songs from this fake musical, how did you all begin to say, okay, let's layer more on it?
Well, we had had discussions like that before we created The Drowsy Chaperone. We had had discussions about how do we present musical material from that period without it just appearing to be parody, because we weren't interested in doing a parody of musicals of the 20s. And so we always wanted to provide some kind of perspective on the musical material we were presenting. And so we came up with this idea of an avid theater fan as a way to sort of deconstruct entertainment of that period and compare it to contemporary musical theater. So it's sort of, you have to understand, I wasn't resistant because I didn't get it. I was resistant because I thought the show was so good. I didn't want to distract. I literally thought that people would be going, oh, shut up, we want to watch numbers. And that didn't turn out to be the case.
Well, in its very earliest form, was there a book, or was it simply a series
there was
of
a book.
It was an actual little book musical. It was a really strange anomaly. I think people imagine, it was at a bachelor party, it was probably just skits with strippers and things like that. It wasn't like that. It was really weird. It just shows what a weird group of friends we were. It was an actual musical with a book, and basically the plot of the musical you see now. The same characters, basically.
Now the product has changed dramatically, obviously, since then. And there are only 2 musical numbers from the original Gift that are still in the show.
So in fact, there is cut material from The Drowsy Chaperone that could then be unearthed.
Reams of cut material.
Yes.
Because this has been an 8-year journey, and the Broadway version of the show is really it's completely reconceived in many ways. And it's what early on in the journey, in the development of the show, we knew that in order for this show to truly be effective, the musical within the show had to be fully realized with great voices, great dancers, great costumes, and also the set of the show. We realized that the man's world had to transform to the musical world. Not to give too much away about that. Are we supposed to give stuff away about the show at this point? It's open at this point.
That's open, yes.
Okay. But yeah, so
we did do other productions, it should be said. We did a remount at a sort of off-Broadway type theater in Toronto, and then we did a fairly big production at Winter Garden Theater in Toronto. And in each one, we really drastically revised and adapted. But oddly enough, the natural place was probably the end place, which was Broadway, because it was about a man imagining Broadway. So it's a strange outside perspective. And you said it was Canadian, but I think it's Canadian in that we're Canadian, the writers, but it's not really a Canadian show. It's because we have American money. And we have American director,
creative team,
obviously,
yeah.
but we have also, we really recreated it in a way for this cast for Broadway, which was something we could only, of course, sort of suggest or imagine. So instead of being this sort of fantasy about Broadway, it became this kind of recreation of Broadway.
Well, before we get into where it is now, I want to spend a few more minutes talking about how it moved along. In terms of the songwriting for the show, you said, Bob, that you didn't want it to be a parody of American musicals, but were there models that you were looking at? How did you look at shows of that period, and were you trying to do very specific shows, or was it just a feeling that you immersed yourself in cast albums of things like Very Good Eddie?
It was broader at first. I mean, that's, if anything, the biggest evolution of, I think, the score is that it was probably the original score actually spanned greater periods. The songs were more like a 40 song or a 30 song or 20 song. And as the show developed, that was one of the things that the score honed more into, identifying it specifically as a 1928 show. So that was a big element of the score.
I mean, one of the things we loved about the period was that there isn't a lot of documentation, of course. People obviously haven't seen the show. I trust no one's seen a lot of shows from the 20s themselves. And of course, there are not really a lot of cast albums. There are no really intact cast albums for that exact period. And then, at least American ones. There's not even films, really. There are just beginning to be films suggesting that period. There's films of Good News and, Heads Up, and there's a couple, and Coconuts and Animal Crackers and things like that. But there's very few actual real documents. And that was, of course, very liberating for the writers because we were able to suggest it. And this show is really about an evocation. We're seeing the show through the ears of this man, imagining what it might have been like. So, yeah, we did we researched.
There
was a time
through the ears of this man.
Yes.
I've never actually heard it described that way.
It's good.
It's good.
We're seeing, there was a time I was reading Guy Bolton librettos and things like that, and there were some influences from shows, and certainly influences from movies of the period.
Yeah, movies.
But it's not an archival thing. It's not an academic piece.
Yeah.
And as it was moving along on its journey in these venues in Canada, because clearly there is a new creative team here for the American production that began out at the Amundsen and is now here on Broadway. Who was directing the show at that time? How was it being developed? Were you primarily guiding it yourselves, or were there other people involved?
No, we had a series of directors. The Toronto Fringe production was directed by a man named Steve Morrell, who was also part of our company of performers, but he had directed as well. The second off-Broadway style, Pass Marai, was directed by Sandy Balkowski, who was a director at Second City, where I came from. And so she was working with the comedians in that sense. And that particular staging, actually, we discovered quite a bit. And then Wintergarten was directed by, I guess you'd describe him as an avant-garde theater director in Toronto named Daniel Brooks. And so that was an odd production.
Well, you say that.
I think you're suggesting something that is a little more.
But you say that you discovered things. What were the discoveries along the way? What did you find from where it began to where you wanted to take it?
Well, at each stage, yes, go ahead.
A lot of it is this, that we just really sort of fleshing out the score more and more, which is sort of...
And working with that particular cast, I mean, that's how we developed the show too. Who it's honed a lot to the people who are performing the roles, which is very much the style of the piece itself. So that certainly had a lot of influence on it.
We sort of write in an odd way, which has been preserved right up to the Broadway thing, in that we all sort of contribute. We all sit around and come up with ideas. And Greg and Lisa have an influence on the script, and I dare say Bob and I have influence on the songs.
Somewhat,
so it's a little small little bit. So
and Casey too.
And of course, and each time we work with the directors, and particularly in this case with Casey, I would say. And I would say actually one of the biggest evolutions is the character of the man in chair, which is really, we realized early on that he was really the lead character, and in a way his story is the real arc, the story arc of the script. And we've really been honing that throughout.
It's like a one-man show with a musical in
a way, yeah.
In a way.
That's right. And it's a part of the fun of the show is the story within the musical is actually very slight. Mm-hmm. The story of his life
intentionally.
Yeah, intentionally smiled. Totally. Yes, that's right. The story of the man is extremely complicated, really, and we only give a hint of it, of the sort of things that have happened in his life and how he got to the point.
It's a funny thing, because it's sort of covert storytelling. We're just suggesting things about him, and by the end you realize, oh, I really know that guy pretty well.
I guess what we're saying is it's really quite a brilliant show.
Yes. And it also provides a wonderful opportunity for the sequel. Man on couch.
Man in hospital bed.
Well, this seems an opportune moment to take a moment and give our audience a little glimpse, its first glimpse, of the Drowsy Chaperone.
I can't wait.
Clear the floor, boys, I'll show you how it's done. First you beat it up, then you sweet it up. When you heat it up, if it tries to rise, don't let it. Toledo surprise.
Surprise?
Wait until it's ready.
Surprise?
Wait until it's ready.
Surprise?
Wait until it's ready.
Now it's looking ready. Surprise!
Got it!
Makes me twitch, makes me shake. This dessert takes a cake. Hits me like a torpedo. Toledo surprise.
Toledo surprise.
Toledo surprise.
Now I'd like to bring in more of our panel, and I think, Roy, you are the natural person to bring in next. You are an American producer. You were on the staff of Paper Mill Playhouse, and you heard about a show in Toronto. And as you said to me before we began today, many producers have a hard time going 20 miles to see a new musical. What drew you up to Toronto, and which incarnation was it that you went to see?
I saw the third incarnation, the third and final Canada production at the Winter Garden that the Mervishes produced. And I was sent an invitation from the Mervishes to come up and see it. And I think the headline from one of the reviews was, "Is Chaperone Broadway bound?" And I read the first paragraph, and it completely intrigued me. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen or heard about before. And it was simply the conceit of the show, in that a man puts his favorite record, his favorite cast recording on his record player, and it comes to life in his apartment, in his mind. And I thought, how interesting. I would love to personally see how that plays out, all the while thinking, I can't imagine that this isn't too inside for a mainstream audience. So I went up there because I thought, well, the reviews are terrific, but I'm also very curious to see how a full audience reacts to it. So I flew up there in July of 2002 and saw the final weekend, the final performances, and saw the audiences reacting similar to how they're reacting now, which was quite good. And I went backstage, met the four of these fellows here, and they were they were in a brief meeting with their stage manager, who was reprimanding them because the show went 20 minutes over with ad-libbing and whatnot. And I was just overwhelmed with the show, and I had said to them, you could have gone on for 3 hours. I thought it was terrific. So I came back to New York and endeavored to secure the rights, but as much as I loved the show, I had always recognized that it really is about the man in the chair, and I spoke with their agent, and I said I would love to try to secure the rights, but I really don't want to do the show unless I have some sort of good faith agreement with Bob Martin that he would be willing to star in the show on Broadway if we were ever so lucky to get it.
That was
there.
a hard decision for me.
A tortured weekend for Bob.
But I didn't want to find out after the fact that he wasn't interested, because I never would have gone after the rights otherwise.
Let me interrupt and ask you, were there other producers seeking the rights? Were you in competition? Were you fending off other offers on the show?
Now we can finally be honest.
Yeah, because I'm happy to say I did not have any idea who else was going after the rights, and it probably would have made me a nervous wreck if I knew. But honestly, I never cared to ask the question after I got the rights. So if you know something, tell us now or forever hold your peace.
Well, not really. Actually, there was some discussion.
There were a few people
who were.
There were a few people sniffing around.
People with guns.
People with guns. Yeah.
But Roy was definitely a preferred choice.
So you got the rights in 2002, and what was the process once you had the rights? How did you go about
part of the process
developing
was frustrating for me, because I was producing 6 shows a year out at Paper Mill. And right after I secured the rights, I was in the process of bringing I'm Not Rappaport to Broadway with Judd Hirsch and Ben Vereen. So, and I had told them that this is going to slow things down a little bit for me. But once we got past Rappaport and I started ramping up again, I had shopped the show around. I knew I wanted to do it in 1 or 2 regional theaters to see how a U.S. audience would react to it. I knew it was probably not the best choice for Paper Mill, simply because of its close proximity to New York. So I sent it to Michael Ritchie, who was up at Williamstown Theater Festival at the time, and a number of other folks. I sent it to Kevin a few years ago. And also, just out of idle curiosity, I put it into the National Alliance of Music Theater Festival for consideration.
And let's take a second and just explain what that is for the people who don't know. The National Alliance of Musical Theater is an organization that supports companies that do musical theater throughout the country, and they do a festival, an industry festival, each year of typically 8 to 12 new musicals presented in truncated form entirely for people in the industry. So it's not the Fringe Festival, it's not performance-based, it's really, it's a bit of an industry bazaar for new material.
Right.
So that came about in what year?
When was that? That was about
2004.
2004. And I wanted to put it in there so that my colleagues could look at this and tell me if I was crazy or not. And I was successful in pretty much getting everyone from the industry, not just the regional theaters from around the country that are members of NAMT, but my commercial colleagues as well. And it was a wonderful phenomenon to see the reaction that came from that room in those 2 performances, not only from the audience of theater lovers, but producing peers. And they actually had to cut the presentation short because it went over so long, which caused a little more
laughter.
Because of laughter and applause, which was a great reason to have to cut us off. So that's how it all came to be, and Kevin came to see the reading, and a number of other
Before we get
folks.
Kevin onto it, in the period between the time you picked up the rights, were you working, was there more development? You'd said you really wanted to have Bob as part of the show, but were there script issues, were there score issues that you were working on with the team?
Well, we hadn't really brought anyone to the table. We hadn't identified a director or any of those folks. So no, there was talk amongst ourselves, and they took what they had learned from Canada and were rethinking things. But when we were chosen for the NAMT Festival, the immediate thought was, we've got to get a director to do this, and there wasn't enough time. We pretty much had to cast it without the author's input because they were up in Toronto. So it was all just a shot.
And the
work we did do was reducing the script for that performance, and which is actually a very valuable exercise.
It was a valuable exercise because we realized there were a lot of things that we didn't mind cutting.
Right.
I mean, it's true.
That's true.
Yeah.
But I didn't think that was a good time to start exploring directors. I wanted New York audiences to see what I experienced in Canada, so I asked Bob if he would be able and willing to direct this 45-minute presentation, which he did, basically get it back up to the speed of where I saw it.
And the people who were cast in that, I mean, there are people who were in that presentation who are in the show now, even though they were literally cast and they get paid really nothing for doing a presentation at NAMT. You put them into it, and how many of the people stayed with it? I remember Georgia Engel.
Georgia Engel and Danny Burston.
Yeah. Oriented originally. So, Kevin, like me, you went to one of those presentations at NAMT, and what was your response to that?
Well, my story starts a little earlier when I took a restraining order out on Roy for constantly hounding me about a show called The Drowsy Chaperone. And I said, oh, it's The Drowsy Chaperone. Yes, it's here on my desk. And It looks delightful, but I don't know. It really sat there for a year because I was busy with other things.
Avenue Q was going on really right in the midst
we were
of
just
this.
moving into previews on Avenue Q, and I had heard about Drowsy Chaperone from the Mervishes earlier, because I also ran a large not-for-profit in St. Paul, Minnesota called the Broadway Center for the Performing Arts, and I'd heard about this production, and but I could not get to Toronto at that time, and I saw Roy, and we had talked together as colleagues many times, and finally, the day before, he saw me at a restaurant, and he said, I'm doing this thing tomorrow, and I said, yes. He says, it's at 11:15, can you come? And I said, okay, sure, because I felt bad that it had been sitting on my desk, and I needed to come see it. And I sat there, and I just watched this thing, and I fell in love with the heart of who the man in chair was, and the fact that I didn't find it to be a parody at all. I found it to be a window into every human being in terms of what defines themselves. And I think that's the power of this show, is that it's about definition of self and how art and life have to cohabitate to inspire you to keep going. And I saw this whole meta thing about what life is. And maybe I'm nuts, but I really said, oh my goodness, this is not about musical theater. This is about the tools we need to survive. And I got very excited about that idea and all the levels it was playing. And just to say, for this 45-minute presentation, it was very choppy, it was very episodic in terms of structure, and no offense, it just was. I was like, okay, that's good. And I didn't find myself laughing as much as just sort of doing calculations in my head of where my emotion was going. And then, because everyone was laughing so much, they weren't able to finish the 45-minute presentation. So there was no ending. All of a sudden, some lovely young woman stepped out and said, I'm sorry, to be fair to all the other napped things, we're going to have to stop right now. And it was just not over. And there was rioting and some beatings. And I thought, oh, good, that can get some advertising. And anyway, I fell in love with it. And I rushed down to the stage and said, Roy, give me a call. I see what you're talking about now. I understand it. And a week later, that next night, I met the authors. And we had a nice sort of meeting of emotional minds. And I said, this is great. This is a great idea. Yes, it could go to Broadway, I think. But we really need to find the right director. It can't, don't do any more work on it until we really find a director, because I have a certain theory about musicals where they must start on the earth and in the heavens, be about a community, and must be driven by love. Those are my three. And I felt the man in chair and who he was, we really needed to explore, because I wanted to know, I felt he was every man. And all he said, that's what excited me.
So, naturally, then the question is, when did you fix upon Casey? When did he join the
longest introduction ever.
Oh, good, I get to talk now.
I tried to throw it to you now.
That was good, that was nice.
For many people, Casey's name first became particularly well known for his work last year on Spamalot as the choreographer.
How's that show doing? Is that
it seems like it'll run.
Right.
But the question is, had you involved Casey in this as director and choreographer prior to Spamalot, or was this a case of, here's a hot show, maybe he's a good guy for us?
Everyone has a different recollection, perhaps.
Well, let's hear all of them.
Okay. Well, we had, just because when Roy and I talked about this, one of the most important things that maybe people don't understand is I run away from shows that are basically fully done, and here's the team, don't you want to be the producer? And I'm like, no, then I'm not collaborating. So in the collaborative process, I think we introduced you to 5 or 6 directors. Some were directors, some were director choreographers. And we all felt that the show had never danced. And I saw that if it's going to be about the 20s, the show better dance.
I mean, a lot of the script is inspired by Astaire Rogers movies, and it was always an obvious hole.
Yes, and from what I understand, because I didn't see any pictures, I stayed away from every image from the Canadian productions, not out of any disservice, but just so I at least could maybe be a voice with a clean slate and have no understanding of what that was except that it did well. And finally we called Casey, and I had worked with Casey. I'd known Casey from Crazy for You when he was a performer, and I was around that show because I was the booking agent for that show. And then I had hired him when I was at the Broadway to choreograph a production of Prince and the Pauper, which I thought he did brilliant work, and I found his choreography always was character-driven. And since this was a group of characters I'd never met the likes of before, I thought it might be a good mix, and Roy and I brought you guys down, and we called before, but our first meeting was when?
It was, well, first of all, Kevin called me on the phone and proceeded to read the script to me over the phone.
I'm his
he
understudy.
goes, you got to hear the first part of this. You got to hear it. He read the first couple speeches, and I thought it was fantastic. My first meeting was the morning after Spamalot opened. So there was opening night party and everything, and I knew that I had to get up for an 11 o'clock meeting. But I thought, that's maybe some good sort of karma or a good omen to, like, the morning after opening night, you're, talking about and hopefully a next project. So I met these guys, and we just hit it off right away.
Immediately. Yeah.
We really did, and it was great, and I felt like we were all on the same page, and we sort of took it from there. And then Kevin called me the next week and said, "We would like you to do this."
It's really no contest. We had great other candidates, but the energy and the mischievous joy that was created with these 5 individuals, where the ideas just started popping. It was, the storytelling became first and foremost. We knew that the talent was there. Let's really talk about the storytelling.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I was just saying, right off the bat too, I was a little nervous about it, because it doesn't read as well as it plays at all, and me not knowing any of these guys and knowing that the lead character is already cast by someone I've never seen perform, that I know nothing about, was a little daunting. And then to see it, and it does read a little bit more like a parody in a way when you first read it, because it's broad comedy in that way, and it made me a little nervous too right after Spamalot. I was like, I don't know if I want to get into the same kind of thing right after this, but what was different is the heart, and that I knew that was sort of what it was, but it was a little scary until we all started seeing each other. But once we met, I was like, okay, I have nothing to worry about, and I really felt like that, even though I'd never seen Bob on stage, which was a scary thing because we were working on the show for months before I'd ever seen him, do anything. It wasn't until
you're sitting there with an author who is also your leading actor.
It was a little. I mean, I felt completely. It's weird because I totally trusted it, but then all of a sudden you have these doubts because you're like, oh my gosh. And also, poor Bob. No, just kidding. But in rehearsals and stuff, he has to. It was hard for him to completely commit to the actor part because he had to wear the writer hat so much. So it was hard for me to always see that, but getting back to that meeting, it was just great, and we all just got along so well. And like Kevin said, the mischievous thing, we all sort of felt like we were laughing at sort of the same things and telling stories.
I think it's safe to say that we were really anxious too, especially the idea of a choreographer director is a bit of a. We knew we needed dancing, but we thought,
the first job, it was my first job directing a Broadway show too. This is my debut, so I think that must have made you guys go
a little bit. But what I was going to say is we were almost most anxious probably about the sense of humor and being sort of crushed by a sort of dance vision, do you know what I mean? Like because it's all about performance and character and humor and when we knew that we had that, then we knew.
But we were also excited, when we thought about it, about the idea of a director choreographer, because this show is not just about dancing, it's about movement. Mm-hmm. And the set itself is almost like another character in the show. It's constantly transforming. Right. And it was absolutely crucial that we had somebody at the helm that knew how to move the action around, move the characters in and out of these 2 worlds that we're presenting.
But we're already moving into the actual production. I'm very curious, once you met, once everybody said, okay, we like each other, we get the same jokes, at that point, you have producers who certainly have an idea of where they think the show needs to get. You have a director who has an idea. What were the things that you focused on? I mean, beyond specific jokes or specific moments, what was your process in that period, and what were you trying to achieve?
I think the first thing was we had to figure, because also we were heading into it pretty quickly. I mean, we had 5 months before we started the Amundsen, but 5 months is nothing when you have to deal with the set. And the thing is, we hadn't quite conceptualized it. The last production that they had done in Toronto, basically had no set. It was 6 doors and a chair. So we weren't in any world, and
it's hard to imagine.
I kind
of like this set, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of like
I think this was the set of the Drowsy Chaperone Academy,
but not as evocative.
Can we borrow it for the tour?
We could talk. So it was really talking about that before we decided like how we were going to proceed with stuff, And so we all sat with the set designer once Dave Gallo got on board, and we came up with, with the idea of making it in an apartment. I, from the very beginning, had this picture of a refrigerator center stage. I don't know why, and I was like, I want people to come out of the fridge. You know what I mean? I just had these thoughts. I guess I was hungry.
You always have that image of the refrigerator center stage.
It's ridiculous.
See who's in it.
But so that's where it sort of started, and we were all, I think, scared of that because we didn't know how literal we wanted the world to be. So we were like embarking on this whole concept and really not sure how it was going to play. And I was always scared that we were going to get on stage in LA and I was going to go, oh my God, this is a huge mistake. We should get the 6 doors back. But we could never act that way as we were doing it. And I have to say that Kevin and Roy were amazing during this whole thing because during that process, they really just said,
go for it.
Here you go for it. And they really completely nurtured us to sit there in a room together and do all this. And then when we talked about it, they were very excited about it. They gave us ideas, but they were just really supportive the whole time. And I'm so appreciative of that.
Yeah, I should explain that as we moved from stage to stage with this show, the reason there were 6 doors at the Winter Garden was that we had to make a choice as to whether we allow the audience to sort of, for it to be an evocation of the musical. In other words, do we have a neutral place where where both worlds coexist, like a kind of metaphor for the theater,
theatrical metaphor,
a theatrical metaphor of a blank space where anything can happen. And basically, that decision was made for us by our very small budget at the Winter Garden.
Yes, exactly.
To be perfectly frank. But we knew that there was something unsatisfying about that. And so we wrestled with this idea of fully realizing the real world. And then, in our discussions, we realized it's the way to go and we should run with it.
We'd always thought of and sort of toyed with, but we're never able to realize. There are a lot of things. There were a lot of things that we couldn't afford or couldn't realize, like the whole sort of ending sort of idea of the show, which
we won't say. But that whole idea came at a set meeting. The whole idea of interruptions from the real world a little bit. Actually, from Dave Gallo is how that started. He was like, "What about if that?" And we're like, And then it ended up being a great idea.
I want to come back to more of the creative elements when the actors join us in just a few minutes. I want to ask Roy and Kevin before they leave us. The challenge of selling a show with a title that is very unfamiliar, authors who have not worked on Broadway before, a leading man who is not a household name. What are
I am in my house.
Yeah.
I just want to defense.
But what are the challenges of the Drowsy Chaperone? And indeed, I've read a few things that there was even some debate about should this show be called the Drowsy Chaperone.
Yeah.
Were these marketing elements?
Hard to imagine that was ever questioned.
It was.
Looking back now.
I think the most important element that kept us on course is I finally got on the right medication. I'm teasing. No, the issue was, 1928 is a very interesting time, too, which I love about the show in terms of marketing. It's really sort of the real transition where vaudeville was really on a spin, and you were taking vaudeville acts and putting them right in shows. And as part of the scene, which is this show, which I love about the time of 1928. So we were looking back at those titles, and saying, well, look, there's always a female, and then and then a word that's a little suggestive. So we were thinking maybe it should be called the Oops Girl as an idea for a musical. And I did some canvassing of people, and Roy and there were weeks about the title. And finally, what we just realized is, look, we've gone this far with it. Why don't we just trust it? The fact that it's not easily sellable and that people are going to have to discover it is what is organically special about it. That people are attaching, and therefore we're not pre-sold. We are, it's amazing what's happened to our sales. It's just blossomed because people now know what the show is. And yet people are now, whether they call it the sleepy chaperone, the drunken chaperone, or the drowsy chaperone, or even the drippy xylophone, they know it's that show that is making people laugh and sing as they leave the theater. And when you're a commercial producer in the theater, what a lot of commercial producers forget is, I don't care how much you spend on advertising. If the experience isn't special in the theater, it doesn't going to work. So you could name the show Here, or It, or nothing. Put a glyph for the show, and if it's good enough, people will come. We had to trust that, but it was everyone was everyone. Who was everyone?
From day one, having seen the show, I always have to go back to my first experience with the show, and I always thought, as much of our advertising states, that really is a word-of-mouth show. We don't really have anything else to sell just yet, and when people see it and they find out our secret, that's what hopefully will win them over.
And they carry the water. They are our advertisers. Every person who sees the show. And that's true. Bob's relatives. That's the special combo.
It
was scary.
In defense of the title, as writers, we were trying to come up with a title that was mundane and forgettable.
Which is lost marketing.
Because I know. Well, again, we weren't thinking of it in terms of commercial Broadway market, but because we thought, what would be funnier than a man saying, "I've got to play for you the record of this show called The Drowsy Chaperone," which is it just sounds like a bad show.
Well, not bad, but weird and archaic, I would think. Like
weird and archaic and sleepy and just what is it? But that's part of the irony of
the idea is the show was never a giant hit, even in its time. It was a strangely passed over musical.
It ran for what? 500 performances? What is? No, we had
it did,
actually,
yes,
and
true.
Gable
Pretty
and
good, actually.
Gable and Stein, as people who buy the souvenir program, and I encourage you to, will discover they wrote 11 other musicals. And they are actually depicted in the souvenir program. In fact, the Man in Chair actually has a whole book of dreams within the souvenir program that talks about his love affair with Gable and Stein.
Gable and Stein are the alleged authors of
Drowsy
songwriting
Chaperone.
team.
We should say that somebody came in to audition.
I was going to
tell that story.
There is no Gable and Stein, but there's this woman who came in when we were auditioning in LA, and she's like, "Oh my God, I know Mr. Gable. Mr. Gable, I know his nephew. Is he here? Is Mr. Gable here? Is he here?" And I was like, "Oh, guess I'm not casting her."
But we're having a lot of fun.
But she was explaining how they all knew each other. I was like, "Really? Great."
His son, his grandson, or
his nephew. I do think, we will be successful when people start leaving and going to Tower saying, "I'd like to see the discography of Gable and Stein. What else do you got?" Because we just saw their show, The Drowsy Chaperone, and we thought it was terrific.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to take a break. We're going to thank Kevin and Roy for telling us their part of the story.
Thank you.
We'll be back in just a moment with some of the actors from the production of The Drowsy Chaperone. And now we'll take a moment and hear a few words about the work of the American Theater Wing.
The American Theater Wing has played a vital role in New York's theatrical life for more than 60 years. We stand for excellence, and we support education in the theater.
Best known for creating the Tony Award, our work reaches beyond Broadway and New York.
These seminar programs, which are supported by the Annenberg Foundation and the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, are an unequal forum for discussions with today's most creative artists.
Downstage Center's in-depth interviews are heard on XM satellite radio. Our grant and scholarship programs support New York theater companies and theater students. And since we began, we have given away more than $2.5 million.
Our theater intern group helps young people who are just starting in their careers build a professional network.
And Springboard NYC is a 2-week boot camp for aspiring actors from colleges across the country.
All of the American Theater Wing's educational and media programs are available for free, on demand, from our website, americantheaterwing.org.
Now, let's return to the seminar.
To explore more of the world of The Drowsy Chaperone, we're now joined by two members of the company of the show. First, Edward Hibbert, who plays Underling the butler, and Beth Leavel, who plays the Drowsy Chaperone.
Thank you.
In the first half of our discussion, the word parody kept getting used as a bad word. It kept coming up. So I'm very curious to ask the actors, in terms of finding a playing style for this material, what were you encouraged to go for? Was it truth? Was it comedy? Was it parody? Where have you had to pitch yourselves? And I should say, because you're not just playing the characters in the Drowsy Chaperone, you have the extra layer of playing the actors who play the actors performing in the Drowsy Chaperone. So there's a whole world. So Beth, I want to ask you first, where was the jumping off point for this show?
Well, yes.
Thank you, that clears it up.
That's a line actually I have in the show.
Not for long.
Anyway, this isn't the time to talk about that.
Oh, it is.
It's a process, it's a working process. My jumping off part was finding who the character was, and that I was informed by that by really figuring out who Beatrice Stockwell was. And she is the woman who plays the Drowsy Chaperone, and finding out and discovering who she was, where she lived in the 20s, what type of person she was. And it was truth in the comedy in that that's who she was. So the shoes were very easy to put on once you realized who this woman was. And just working with everyone, and it became, I never thought parody, I just always thought this is the woman, this is her world, this is my truth, go.
But very little of that appears on stage. So I'm curious, in terms explicitly, so who is Beatrice Stockwell, who's playing this character?
Beatrice Stockwell, as I discovered with the creative team and during rehearsals, was a diva actress in the 20s who was very demanding and very popular, very, very famous, very well known, came from a huge theatrical family.
Later became Dame Beatrice Stockwell.
Later became Dame Beatrice Stockwell, as we know, where she sang rousing anthems, and she insisted on certain things being done every time she was cast in a show. She came with a list that had to be done, or she would not take the role. And that list was achieved in this show by having a wonderful song in the show that probably she demanded happened. I don't know if the Drowsy Chaperone should sing the song, but Beatrice demanded that it happen. She demanded the final entrance. She demanded certain things in costumes, and it became, she informed Drowsy completely about where I needed to go with her, with, like I said, with the creative team's help and with rehearsals. And there was one great thing we did in rehearsal in California where it was called we did lots of exercises, but this one was called the hot seat. Did you talk about that when I was gone?
Well, we didn't. Basically, when we did rehearsals, for the first 2 weeks, we did exercises every single morning with everybody to get everyone on the same page, and all to do with vaudeville and who their vaudeville performers were playing these roles, so that the show, the characters, even though Bob's character says this show was two-dimensional, the show doesn't feel two-dimensional to the audience that's watching it now, because all of these people have such a life. And Hot Seat was something that the writers had done at Second City as a improv exercise, and we did different exercises. We made them make up a dance for their character. We did all kinds of stuff every morning, and it really, really helped the show. I mean, it really helped everyone get physical and get to know who they were and to come from a truthful place.
And stylistically be on the same page too.
Exactly, we did style stuff too. But anyway, Hot Seat is each of these people had to sit in a chair, and everyone asked them questions about their character. Like we'd ask Noel Fitzpatrick all about, what was it like to do this? And everyone literally was put in the hot seat and had to answer all these things about the character, and it was great.
Oh,
and it was all so informative, and we made them read scenes from like modern day soap operas as characters from 1928.
As Beatrice would read it or something.
We did all kinds of stuff to just get it that specific. And like you said, the audience won't necessarily know that or see that, but that's what it was done for, because the audience knows that these people have an active life.
Absolutely.
And did those exercises inform your writing? Were there things that came out of it that then became part of the show?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in complicated ways.
Well,
I mean, the idea for one of the things we like Kevin was saying about the period, is shows weren't fully integrated musicals as we understand them. Well, they were beginning to be, and there were some, but still, this show, The Drowsy Chaperone, had elements of vaudeville, like Casey was saying, elements of sort of melodrama, of spectacle. And what we imagine, at least when we try and imagine what it was like to see, I don't know, Ray Bolger in Heads Up or something like that, is that it was based around him, and the energy that the audience got was of this performer, and feeling the life of this performer who was able, the charisma came across the stage no matter what he was playing. And that's what this sort of exercise allowed us to do, to build it out of what the characters. I've always built the show out of the been inspired by the actors and tried to service them.
We built the whole thing to their strengths.
Which is, that's what I was going to say.
Everyone's strength.
It's not so much about the details that came out in those exercises, it's about the voice that we started to hear from each character. And in the case of Kitty and Feldzig characters.
Completely.
It's, Jennifer Smith and Lenny Wolpe is about a relationship between two characters. And we sort of reconceived those two characters within the show to support what we were seeing between those two actors. And Beth really is the
Beth was
prime
instrumental
example.
because when I first read the script, and actually we had a very hard time casting the role because it wasn't well written. No,
it wasn't complete.
It wasn't finished.
No, but it wasn't finished. No, I don't mean that in a bad way at all. And these guys know that.
In the good way.
I mean, it was written terribly.
It was really.
No, but the thing is, it was very two-dimensional, and it was written. That character was written just to say a line, say a line, say a line without much behind it. But now that we fleshed it out, and Greg and Lisa wrote a new song for her, a different song, so it didn't feel as two-dimensional. We were able to, do all of it around Beth and make this role what Beth has brought to it now. It is Beth, and it's so great to watch because it wasn't that. We didn't when we first started, nobody knew why it was called the Drowsy Chaperone, because the Drowsy Chaperone is not the lead part at all. She's a very peripheral part to start with, but now people sort of know why it's called that because of Bob's relationship to her and how they, she's his favorite character, and the character is a star now.
Things she does in the plot
exactly.
And
That was one of the challenges when the producers were discussing the title. We thought, well, we'll show them why it's called the Drowsy Chaperone. We'll make her a star.
Well, and though it's not called Underling, Edward in these exercises, and you can talk to them about that later. But in
Underling's Revenge.
In those exercises,
Well, another one which was really helpful was Casey brought in an array of wonderful 20s, 30s musicals, and we sat there and watched them. And it occurred to me that, first of all, there's this wonderful thing that these numbers would erupt, and everybody would go into sort of loose-limbed character dancing, which I think has become very much part of what we're all doing in the show. And also, when I looked at those people who played these roles, and at that time, they were cast for their personalities. There were actors who went from playing one droll man. I mean, Eric Blore and Edward Everett Horton's love child is Noel Fitzpatrick. And in my hot seat, I decided all his career was just from one Jeeves-like manservant to another. And that's what you want a good butler, you'd call on Noel Fitzpatrick.
That's right.
And you get what you get.
But in terms of the playing style, I'm curious, you appeared in Me and My Girl.
At the same theater, yeah.
Which, of course, is the kind of show that this is modeled upon.
Yes.
So, in terms of creating this layered character, how did you draw on what you'd done in Me and My Girl and that style?
Well, not really, because I think that's a wonderful show, but that really wasn't a pastiche, a homage. It just was a rollicking, good musical comedy.
Well, it was that show from the period.
Yeah, I think more of The Boyfriend, which I have a connection to because my dad was in the original production. And when I first read this, I thought this, in every sense of the word, is as perfect a pastiche, a parody, which I don't think is a negative term. I think it is a loving term for what we're doing. Parody is great. It's only bad when it's bad parody. That's true. Seen a few of those and done a few of those, but we digress. But no, I think that The Boyfriend and The Drowsy Chaperone are very kindred spirits in terms of what they are lovingly sending up.
But the difference, I think, is the man in the chair.
Of course, that's a whole other layer. That's what gives it its complete originality. But within the book show, I think that's the case.
And as we talk about then modeling on the actors who are in it, and you've said that along the way there was even some of that for the songwriters when certainly Beth and Edward came into it. We already heard there was a new song.
how did you work with these actors? What sprang up in your minds once you really had the cast, not just these two, but people like Danny Burstein and Sutton Foster and
George Engel
and George Eng.
Georgia, of course.
This is yeah.
So what came out of those actors? These actors.
Well, certainly with Beth, like I think when you came on board,
So interesting. Go ahead.
no, your big song was still kind of it was
in the works.
it was in there, it was there, but it was, I think we had fully
Right.
nailed
It was
it.
another song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so you just sort of filled out that song. Like now it's
Well, there was another song initially in
Yeah.
the earlier productions.
Really
It was
three,
more of
I think, in
a
total.
patter song, as kind of a
Very Noel
Cowardy
Coward
type song,
process,
which
Edward will be doing soon.
which didn't really work for the kind of diva character she was doing. And when
Yeah.
we saw what she was performing, the way we wanted to transform the character into this kind of force.
And the
this kind
energy of the
Etty
song we
Mame-like
needed.
force.
The energy of the song we needed at that time in the show,
point
which
in
is
the
something that
show,
Casey
yeah.
was into. It was like, this is the introduction of this character. This character is introduced briefly in the opening number, which also was a new number. But this was the number where she had to win over the entire audience, and they all had to see why this man in the chair loves this person so much, loves this performer. And as the number grew, and we saw what Beth could do, kept notching that up a few notes.
Yeah.
Up a third.
We did. We kept bringing it up. Yeah.
You hold that longer, and
That's true.
And that's very much how we work, anyways. Once we come with a song to someone, we like to work with them and the musical director, whoever that may be, and fiddle with it as we go along.
And for the actors, I also want to ask, because it's not the most common situation, we often hear, actors, you're not supposed to go up to another actor and talk about their performance or express screens. Everybody has to find their own way. You leave that to the director. But, of course, you are performing in this show with one of your authors. Has that been an interesting situation for you, to suddenly have somebody else who's up there on stage maybe pulling you aside and saying, I was sort of thinking about this? Edward?
It's been a very happy, collaborative energy from day one. And I don't think it's ever had it's not been any kind of tight-lipped person. And we've been very open and creative, and I think if something isn't working, one of the things I'm loving about this, because it's the first time I've actually been in a totally original book musical, is that the journey, the refinement, the constant changes, figuring out the mathematics, if you will, of why one line isn't quite landing and discussing it. It's fascinating, and it keeps one right up there on one's toes. So no, I think it's been a very positive thing. And
it's also good because it was scary to me at first, thinking, oh my gosh, the writer's in the show, so he's not going to be able to see. But he's sitting in a chair watching the whole show, so he gets to see what is and isn't working as far as that part. He leaves it to us for his own stuff, and he can feel his stuff as well.
And I know you are a writer in the show, but that's not. I know you as man in chair, and during the show, we as performers, we as the actors on stage, never see the man in chair. He's invisible. We are just in his world. So,
it's a very strange process for me, because I mean, rehearsal-wise, I'm never performing with anyone. So and so much of my material is geared to how the audience reacts to something that I say. Rehearsal is absolutely torture for me because my scene partner is not there, basically, and then actual development is difficult as well because I usually have the changes for something a couple of days before the cast sees them. I know what's going. So
yes.
I know what's going too now. Let's go to the point where we'll try a new line there. And I have to control myself because it's like it comes out and you just hear it just sitting there and you go, that's so not going to be there.
we change quickly.
Send in the new pages.
You're right, though, Edward. It is a fascinating math. It's certainly not a science. But it is great to have the opportunity, a cast that's willing to take changes, a few hours before showtime and try something out. But the tough part for me is knowing a couple of days beforehand, saying lines that I know are going to be cut, and hearing actors say lines that I know are no longer there, and moments that I know don't work, and I know why they don't work. And having to turn that mechanism off and commit to character is not
because you don't want to be on
easy
stage wincing.
That would be bad.
Or taking notes or sighing.
But obviously, Bob is disciplined when you say that. He doesn't talk to actors on the stage and or in rehearsals. He will come up and Casey and we'll all talk.
Although we talked early on about the fact that because this is very much about a Broadway musical, it is American in that sense, I did want to ask the authors, did you find, as the show has transitioned from Canada to the US, was there a Canadian sensibility and things that landed there that don't, over multiple productions, that suddenly you found weren't playing here?
There was one joke. There was one joke.
What's that?
At the beginning of the show, there's this sort of prayer to the audience asking for the evening to be an enjoyable evening, asking God. It's hilarious. And anyway, one of the things we used to say is, well, the joke's of course not going to work here, but we used to say, if it must be a Canadian play, please don't let it be a Canadian play. Because in Canada, we're used to that kind of rural melodrama that's really
turgid.
Some.
But
and so we, of course, cut that. But we didn't.
On the more
really
positive side about Canada, I would say that we've always thought that there
wasn't
was
a negative.
No, I know. We've always felt that that there is a Canadian angle, which is sort of the man in the chair, that he has this perspective outside of Broadway. In a way, he's watching as we watched from across the border. He is watching Broadway and imagining what it's like and being titillated by it and also critical. And
separated from it.
you know, I think that's why actually there's the old theory about why so many comedians come out of Canada, and I think that we have that sort of forced observational distance.
It's true.
Since we're on Canada for a moment, I want to diverge wildly from the topic of the Drowsy Chaperone, and the producers have left the panel so they won't be going, oh, we're losing time promoting the show, because all of the creators of this show, you've collaborated many times in many permutations, but I do want to mention that even as this was going on, you were becoming involved in a television show, which for me personally was the most exciting new hour of television since The Sopranos appeared. And that is a show called Slings and Arrows, which has been aired here. Which has been aired here in the US on the Sundance Channel. And it is indeed a show about a theater company. So even as you're writing a show that springs off of the creation of theater, you were also involved in another show about the creation of theater.
Oh, the levels of irony.
All I will say is that to titillate people for the next season is that if you're thinking how did it influence the show, was there any?
I'm just curious.
I will say that my character, who plays a horrible director, a sort of pretentious director, not based in.
Not at all. He puts his arm around me when he says that.
I just realized some people might be thinking, oh, he was inspired by Casey, and there's going to be a hilarious part. But anyway, he directs a musical in the third season that Lisa and Greg wrote the music for. So there's a sort of even more transference.
But I am curious because there is the idea of constantly referencing theater and making drama out of theater and the story of theater, and clearly that has some appeal for you all.
Yes.
What drove Slings and Arrows even in the time that you were doing this?
Well, yeah, I should say I'm one of the creators of the show and one of the writers, and Don is in the show, and Lisa and Greg write the original music in the show. I think for me and the other two writers, Mark McKinney and Susan Coyne, we've all sort of had a love-hate relationship with the theater, being performers and audience members as well. Performers particularly, because it's a really difficult job, especially when you're doing classical theater, where you have to experience, you know, your eyes being gouged out every night. It's when you may have had bad pad thai just before the show, and we which actually happened to be last night, by the way. But we really find fascinating the life of the actor on stage as compared to the backstage life, as well as the life, the production realities and theater that audience may or may not appreciate, and that whole world is what we find interesting, and that's what Slings and Arrows is about. It's about the personalities of the people backstage, not so much what actually happens on the stage, but what's going on in their own lives.
Well, to come back to Drowsy Chaperone, this issue about commenting on theater, television commenting on theater, theater commenting on itself. We spoke earlier, Casey, and you touched on the issue of was there a similarity between what Spamalot was doing and what this show is doing. This is a show which constantly comments on itself in a way. And I just wanted to ask you, as you were exploring it, how do you find an emotional through line, a dramatic through line, even as you're constantly reminding people that they are indeed watching a show?
Well, I think what's fun about Drowsy Chaperone, which we've talked about with the actors recently too, is that, and that's why, even though, you know, the parody word or whatever, you know, it's not like that's a tricky word, but what happens to me is sometimes people use parody and spoof. It's not a spoof, you know what I mean? That's I don't feel like that at all. But the thing is, I always wanted to feel like a Valentine to that era and to those shows. So the thing that's so important with Drowsy is that the actors are completely sincere in everything they do. And I've tried to take out as much commenting as possible from them because Bob's the only one that should be commenting on it. You know what I mean? So the actors should be absolutely genuine and in that world. And, you know, the things that Noel Fitzpatrick and Beatrice Stockwell are going for and doing are very real to them, too. You know, the audience may not know all that stuff, you know, but hopefully they see the heart through it and the other things and the joy of performing. And that, to me, is what was really important about this. Spamalot has that, but they do verge on the spoof. You know what I mean? With, like, we know, oh, good, we're skewering Andrew Lloyd Webber here, or we're skewering, you know, like an Olympics number in this one, or we're doing Vegas here. There were all those different things that we were parodying there in that. And I wanted this to feel more straight ahead. And that was the thing that I really, when I first came on, I really wanted to be sure that it had that. And because of these guys, they feel the same way as I do about, you know, if it's not truthful, there's nothing. And I feel like that in comedy too, and I think that was the Spamalot thing too, that even though, you know, they're doing all this broad stuff on stage, everyone is just out there just saying the lines. Mike Nichols keeps saying, you know, just say the lines. Just say the lines. And, you know, if you're truthful to what's happening, I always think comedy works. And that to me is the most important thing in directing a comedy or choreographing a comedy. You know, the thing is, we don't ever stop, like Bob said, you know, that they were attracted to the idea of a show that just kept moving. And that doesn't mean like we stop and we do a 5-minute dance number. There's no time for it and there's no need for it in this show. You know, this has to be character driven and it's all very physical, but we very rarely in this show stop and do a dance number because that's not what the show needs. Like Sutton's big number, Show Off, has her just going crazy doing stuff, but it's not really a dance number. Sure, it's a dance number in many ways, but it's a comedic tour de force for her. And that's, you know, that's what I want to do, is make sure the numbers are funny, and the numbers in this show, as well as the numbers in Spamalot, feel like they're part of the show. You know, that they feel like we're not like taking this funny show and then all of a sudden the choreographer wants to do a dance number to show how well he dances. You know, that's not what I had in mind with this at all.
Well, Greg and Lisa, were you writing songs that were meant to be funny songs, ha ha, let's laugh, or were you really trying to focus on songs that would have made sense in something called The Drowsy Chaperone?
Both. Because in a show like The Drowsy Chaperone, there'd be the comic song, and then there'd be the sweet song, and so we were just trying to, you know, working with Casey as well when we were working on the score, let's make this score like the kind of score you'd hear in the 1920s. So Noel Fitzpatrick sings a funny song, and the bride there's a sweet moment with the bride and the groom. So we were just trying to create, as authentically as possible, what a show like that would sound like.
Although sometimes the straight songs are also funny. Often they are funny too. Do you know what I mean? Like Beth's song is presumably a straight song, but certainly funny too.
Well, let's take a moment and look at another moment from The Drowsy Chaperone, and we'll come back and pursue this a little bit more.
I don't want to show off. I don't want to wear this no more. Play the saucy Swiss Miss no more. Blow my signature no more. I don't want to show off.
Janet, please.
Don't try to control me. I've made up my mind, and that's it. I quit. I'm leaving it all behind. I don't want to be cute no more. Make the gentleman hoot no more.
Since Casey brought up the show-off number, I want to ask, in The Drowsy Chaperone, the original production in the 1920s, was that a comic number in those days? Was that always meant to be?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Sure.
I mean, these shows had their own wit and self-referentiality, and they, you know, it's not. That's why it's not exactly a parody, because the shows had their own complexity. And when Casey says straight, he doesn't mean straight dramatically. He means committed to the comedy of the period. Obviously, Edward's character is a comic character and isn't serious, but he's. What was important was the way Edward was able to find a comic persona and a comic routine. He pulls off an amazing comic routine, and usually comedy is dated very quickly, but it's hilarious when Edward it
is hilarious. We've talked about the fact that the characters, the layer of the characters, the actor playing the character in the show, we know their backstory. Do you, Edward and Beth, do you in fact know the whole arc of The Drowsy Chaperone, even the parts of the play that we're not seeing represented? Because we know cast albums, which is what we're hearing, are only the highlights. Is that story fleshed out? Edward, do you know the whole arc of what happens?
Parts of the show we don't get to see?
Exactly.
Well, I'd like to say Underling's Dream Ballet. But I think, to answer that question, I don't know. But I do know that the highlights of the show, which we do get, it's really, I listen to it every night, and I think it is so perfect because musically and scene-wise, it's got everything that a book musical from the 20s would have. Well, it's got your showstopper. It's got your beautiful romantic ballad. It's got quirky, eccentric numbers that build to a great climax. So it has, in fact, got all the ingredients you'd have found in a show of that period. I mean, scene-wise, too.
I mean, it really is the whole show.
The complete show. To me, it is the whole show. I'm thinking, oh, God, there's more?
I mean, it's, it tells the whole journey, so I just think it's a nice...
Well, the man says that at the top of the show.
It's the complete show.
It's the complete show. It is a recording of the complete show.
It's a two-record set. It's actually a transcription sort of show.
I mean, clearly it's pushing it a bit historically, but there were recordings at the time where they would record scenes as well. There weren't really no extent full shows like that. There aren't now either, but you know, we're suggesting that the whole show is there.
And Beth, you...
I agree with what Edward said. To me, it is the whole show, you know, knowing that's the journey, beginning, middle, and end, and I'm very aware of the entire story of that. That's a very interesting question. I was going, that's it, though. That's our whole story right there, isn't it?
And we were talking earlier about what you hear from the audience, lines that work, lines that don't work. And I'm wondering how the audiences have affected you. What are the things that, now that you are on Broadway, what have been, from all of these incarnations, what were the big changes? What are, and indeed, as we're talking, even in the green room, you were saying there's still little tweaks, but what were even the changes from Los Angeles that went into the show?
Well, two big changes.
Big change was there was a dream ballet in Act 2, the second half.
Was it not Edwards?
It was not Edwards, unfortunately. But there was a dream ballet that was sort of, this is where we did go into parody with the dream ballet, you know, so which is why we didn't feel like it was right. And the audiences loved it as its own piece, you know. It was, and Bob even sort of said, you know, it was ahead of its time. So it sort of had pieces of every dream ballet you've ever seen, like that kind of feel. It started with, you know, Evil Monkeys, and then went into American in Paris and all that kind of stuff. And it just was a big dream ballet. And what we ended up doing is cutting it, basically. But we took elements of it and then wrapped it up. One of the things we'd heard in LA is that people wanted Sutton to have a little bit more of a featured moment in Act 2.
It is a one-act show, but
it's a one-act show, but we call it Act 1 and Act 2 because the musical had an Act 1 and Act 2. But so what we ended up doing was taking elements of that dream sequence and using that to expand the number for her. And Greg and Lisa wrote some other, you know, great stuff that follows it. And then we just kept spinning it around and making that. And actually, thank God, because it ended up doing great things for Bob and his character, with him really getting involved in the show in the second half of it, which was great. So it's that. Edward and Georgia Engel had a different number in LA than they do now. We replaced that, and we're much happier with what it is now, because it's, the one now is much more character driven. It's like you know who these people are, and now we're doing a number that is comedic and suits the two of them better.
It's also related to story. The other one wasn't as much. Yeah.
And when that change came in, Edward, did they come to you with the new song before they told you you were losing the old song, or was it?
No, I had a feeling by the time we all said au revoir in Los Angeles that I could not remember I Remember Love, which was a charming number, which, by the way, is going to be on the album, which is lovely. Be nice to hear it again. But no, this is much better. I mean, as Casey says, it takes our characters and we fly with it.
Yeah, and also
Actually, I Remember Love, the song that was cut, when I first heard it, is one of my favorite songs that Greg and Lisa have written. It really is. I absolutely love it. And that was the one I was like, that is perfect. That is so 1920s. That's great. But as you find, you know, when you're doing an original musical, if something doesn't suit the show, it can be fantastic. And if it isn't, you know, once you get the pieces of the puzzle together, sometimes something's not right. And that's why the number went. Not because it wasn't a good song. It was, you know, my favorite song, and it just wasn't right for what we were doing once you put everything else together in front of it.
Lisa,
I was just going to expand on that you know, writing the new song, this is where we're talking about actors inspiring the writing, because we have joke lines for Edward when we realized how funny Edward is. It's like, oh, now we know the voice of Edward, so a lot of this song was inspired
so informative for us, yeah. Because me and Lisa actually, when we write songs, we often demo them ourselves, and we create a little demo.
Hear that?
And you know, Lisa was Georgia, and I was Edward, and that's how we sort of a lot of times we work. So having known them and loved them, it was. Even though the song wasn't the easiest song to write, it was certainly hugely
I've forgotten about it already.
Informative for us.
When you say a song's not easy to write, what do you mean? Is it the lyrics? Is it just finding the right tune? What is that?
It was more of the placement of that song in the number and what it serves for the characters.
Yeah, what the actual comic concept of the song was and how that was going to work. Also fitting it right in. It's going to be before that song, it's going to be after that song, and it has to be this length, and it has to be about this. Yeah. And it was just trying to fit it perfectly.
The last pieces of the puzzle are always the most difficult to create. But it's funny because that song was the most collaborative thing that of the four of our writers.
Which the new one or
yes,
really?
We all contributed. I mean, obviously it was major.
No, but we were all kind of.
We all took a step.
Yeah, we're all kind of pouncing on it.
Me too. Goes back to that thing about maths we were talking about earlier. Yeah. I think sometimes, and as Casey was saying, I Remember Love, the song that we're not doing anymore, was delightful. I heard the demo and I went, oh, that is adorable. And I think it's the mathematical thing of just like, no one was doing anything wrong, I hope. But I think what it was just given the journey the show was on, it didn't seem to be quite the right place for it, maybe. And so that's when things change, and it's all part of the process.
And in that process, I mean, it's, as we've said, there's a lot of material that's no longer in the show. It has transformed enormously over its journey, now going back to 1998. How do you finally make that decision to take away something that you may love in many ways? Is it ultimately, Casey, that you get to say, this has got to go? Can there, because there's really quite a team here. I mean, it's 4 authors and a director.
What's great about this group is that basically, when something doesn't work, all of us just go like, we'll meet in Bob's room, we'll go like, well, that was clear. Even if it's something we love, like the ballet, there was one day we all just went, you know what, we got to cut the ballet. Yeah. And we all knew that we loved it, and it was just time to do that.
It's sort of amazing.
It really is amazing. We would just go in there and we're like, well, it's sad, isn't it, that we have to like cut the, you know, there's a couple that were like the Dream Robert, we had like a dream ballet with the Dream Robert and Janet were in it too. And it was the only step out that these two, the ensemble members got to do in the show. And we tried we wanted so badly to keep them in it once we transferred the number into being Sutton's number. And we did, and it was crushing because we just knew after we saw that, we're like, it's not gonna work. And we had to tell them that. But we all pretty much agree.
Yeah, we do.
It's been very rare. It's almost
psychic at times.
Yeah. Even with little lines.
Yeah.
Even with words.
Punctuation.
In the last couple of minutes that we have, you've made an extraordinary journey from Canada to Broadway. Where are your hearts now about this piece, and are there going to be other pieces coming from this team?
Oh, I hope so.
Well, we
haven't really discussed.
We haven't figured this out.
This one is just. It feels like it's been, well, for me anyway, my life for the last 10 years. So it's hard to know kind of where. I'm gonna have to get a big breath soon and figure out, what the next thing is, because.
Definitely for me, and Lisa, something I wanted to point out was actually the Drowsy Chaperone is what brought us together as a songwriting team. I'd known Bob through Second City, so he always wanted us to get together, and I'd known Lisa and her work. So in so many ways, I feel that whole genesis of the piece and all the evolutions has also been us developing as a team, and that's certainly something we've done. Written many other things. Well, the development of the Drowsy Chaperone has been going on, so it's a big part of that is,
I mean, we're all friends, like we're very close friends, and it started as a wedding gift, so there's no question that we're going to be together one way or another, and it's almost inconceivable that we won't be working together. And now that we've our little friendship has expanded onto Broadway, and we find to our astonishment that we have these instincts, and we feel actually more comfortable than we ever would have imagined, and this evocation we had of Broadway actually makes some sense, that it just seems impossible that there won't be some continuation. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk after.
I think my final question has to be a personal one for you, Bob, which is, this is a show that began your marriage. And your marriage has obviously gone through the entire evolution of this show. Where is Janet in all of this? Because you said she was someone you performed with, she was part of your group, yet she is watching this process the whole way.
Yeah, she played Janet Van de Graaff in 2 productions of the show. Yes, it's bittersweet. We're separated. She's in Toronto, I'm living in New York. I mean, depending on how the show goes, she'll relocate. But it's been fantastic. It's been bizarre. I mean, our manager in Toronto said we should consider copywriting our names. I cannot tell you how odd that is. But I mean, she loves it. We love hearing the Van de Graaff family name sung every night. But to answer your question, it's very odd. The marriage has survived. And is
as far as we're concerned, we still feel she's there on that stage.
She's on the refrigerator.
She is actually. Our wedding pictures on the refrigerator on set.
So we say hi to her every show.
Everyone in the cast has something on the set, and producers and crew members. We just wanted to make it personal, so everyone's got memorabilia and stuff on the set, and pictures of family members and kids. Beth has her family up there, and it's pretty cool.
Well, there are so many elements that go into a show, from the individual mementos to obviously the overall shape. It's, as in this day and age, that remarkable thing, a truly original new Broadway musical. I want to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank our audience and the people here at CUNY TV, our partners at CUNY, as well as the CUNY Department of Continuing Education and Public Programs. I hope you'll all join me in thanking the many people who have made the Drowsy Chaperone.